We get started. It's 6:34, and this is Mark Howell, and this is the Concord Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force meeting for Thursday, March 24th. And I'll start with a roll call. Gordon Brockway. Gordon, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Scott Hopkinson.
Present.
He's present as well. David Hessel is present. And Gail Heyer.
Here.
And myself, Mark Howell. So everyone is here. We're in the thick of it at the moment. I'm looking for a volunteer clerk. I know just about everybody has taken a shot at this recently. All I can promise you is we're in the home stretch.
I'll do it, Mark. Just a question. Are these rapidly posted on YouTube?
They are doing a much better job. I was going to mention that. I believe every meeting is posted now, even including March 9th, which is our last.
Okay. I have a tendency to go back and use YouTube as the reference point rather than take notes as we're meeting.
And I was just going to mention that I was reviewing some of the meetings today as I was sort of refreshing my memory for the minutes that we were doing. And you can even turn on closed captioning and it will show you the words that are being said. So it's kind of nice. And I know Vince Carlson is often reminding us to
Post meeting. Okay.
access that. Okay. Great. So thank you, David. In terms of minutes to approve, I know I personally have been able to go through February 10th and February 17th, which have both been out for a while. I sent some comments along from both of those just recently, well, this afternoon. Not terribly substantive, but if you guys are comfortable, let's see if we can address the February 10th meeting minutes. I don't know if everybody got a chance to see these have been distributed. Gordon was clerk for this meeting, I believe.
I was.
And I'm going to put the version that I sent out a little earlier this afternoon with my comments up, so that if you haven't had a chance to review them, you can, and we can hopefully go ahead and approve those. Let's see. All right. Yeah, that's right. I'm just getting the right window. So. Okay. February 10th. And last meeting I had asked that we postpone these just a little bit because I felt like the discussion that we had during the chair's report about the payment in lieu of franchise, which is the portion of the minutes that are on the screen right now, was it was sort of acknowledged to be incomplete in what we were what we had in front of us, and I had agreed to go ahead and kind of clean it up. So this is the updated version of those, and what I'll just walk quickly through the changes that I proposed. We were talking about what had occurred in the PEG access meeting that had occurred on that same day, and I just mentioned that was the budget for FY23 as a matter of clarification. The payment in lieu of franchise amount is there. Before it said about 20% of telecom, but it didn't say what, and that calculation is 20% of telecom free cash flow and approximately 5% of the Minuteman. Actually, I'm going to add something right here. MMN budget. And this policy was accepted, didn't seem to make any sense to me. So like I couldn't make sense of that. So I'm proposing that we just delete that sentence. So that's why it's crossed out. So I'm deleting it now. And the policy for payment in lieu of franchise, as Scott later described to us, was that it was going to be 3%. Sorry, making some fixes in real time of broadband revenue. And there was a fee negotiated with Comcast, but I would actually I'm not sure, but I would sort of disagree with telecom as being asked to provide an according amount. Would anybody have a problem with deleting that statement too?
Yeah, my understanding was this was an agreement with our previous town manager,
Right.
recently departed town manager, that between him and somebody, Matt or somebody in the light board, they said, let's do something.
Yeah.
And
It
that's
involves
my
the white board.
understanding, only based on secondary,
Yeah.
based on communication effort indirectly. So I don't have direct knowledge.
And Scott, I went back and listened to the recording today, and the third paragraph is basically what happened at that meeting. You reported that the deputy town manager, Kate Hodges, had related to the PEG Access Committee at their meeting that the town manager, Stephen Crane, working with staff, had decided to make this payment, and that they considered it, and I believe you were quoting Kate Hodges when you said the right thing to do. And Gordon commented that he didn't remember the light board discussing or making this decision. And I had then gone on to say that we don't usually enable staff to transfer funds from one budgeting entity or enterprise to another without town meeting or other authorization. And the reason I think this is kind of important to get down is because these are also similar to the comments that I made at last week's enterprise budget hearing.
Yeah, we noticed. Thanks.
And I recalled asking at the 2021 budget hearing, asking about the origin of this, and, and broadband ratepayers are being burdened with paying for Minuteman Media Network. And then we went on and—
Mark, it's Minuteman Media.
Thank you.
It'd be kind of cool if it was the medium that could predict the future for us.
Tell us what's about to happen.
Yeah.
That would be worth $20,000. Good. So, and then Scott, you went on to talk about how there was an expectation that that it might go on later, and then you mentioned something about the repayment of the telecom loan, and I had said that, as our responsibility from a task force is to understand the impacts of telecom, and it's a growing drag on the telecom finances. And then Mary asked the question about the original, thinking behind it. And you had said that it was like pilot, and then there was some back and forth about the fact that pilot is about $500,000, but I didn't think that was terribly important to talk about in the minutes. But she had suggested that we raise the issue at the budget hearing, and I had made a comment that unless somebody follows up on issues raised at the hearings, there may not be a result. So that was kind of my enhancement of these minutes to reflect that discussion, which I continue to think is important and is pretty much a summary of what was directly on the video. Any further comments or questions about any of that?
It looks good to me.
Okay. All right, and so, and it goes on. So beyond that, in these minutes, most of the purple on the screen here is your comments that you had made, and I'm just finding a couple of extra typos. And then I don't think I had made any other changes just beyond what was distributed. And that's it. So any further comments or discussions about the February 10th minutes?
Look good to me.
If not, I'd love to have a motion. I will save these and
I move we accept the February 10th minutes as reviewed, as we see here.
Second,
David, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll take a roll call. Gordon,
Aye.
Scott? Scott,
Sorry, muted. Aye.
David,
aye.
Gail,
I,
and myself, aye. So that's unanimous. Okay. Great. And I would propose that we also consider the February 17th minutes, which were created by Gail. And I can put those on the screen too. Gail, I sent them back to you, which was really just a little bit of
yeah, I reviewed your
yeah,
edits and they all looked fine.
yeah. I think-
I used kind of a larger font, so it's not
Yeah,
as long
February,
as it looks, but I feel like this is
yeah, I might,
a lot of
before
material.
we publish them, we might want to change it from 18 point to something smaller, but other than that. So there was just a couple of little things. So does anybody else have anything they want to offer or comment on about? And I believe so, just according to this, myself, Gordon and Gail were present, and Scott and David were not available, although you may have had an opportunity to review the. So hearing no further comments. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the February 17th, 2022 minutes.
Okay,
Second.
Scott, thank you. And any further discussion? No. Hearing none. All those in favor, Gordon,
Aye.
Scott,
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Gail?
I,
And myself, aye. Thank you. Just in terms of, so those will be also approved, and thank you very much for that. And I don't believe, wanted to double check. I don't think we have the 24th yet.
24th of February.
Of February, which was that, Scott, that was you.
Oops. Okay. Let me look. I
And-
apologize.
And then Gordon, I know you did March 2nd. I have not looked at those in detail yet myself. So, and Gail, you did March 9th, and I think those are available. But I would propose that we move on for the moment, just so we don't spend the whole meeting working on minutes.
Okay. I do have them and I apologize. It slipped
Okay.
through the crack for me. I've been really busy with work and some other things.
Understand?
So I'll go, fortunately, by now the YouTube should be up, so I'll go back and dust them, make sure they're in good shape and then send them around.
Great. Okay, thank you. And we'll try to deal with those next week if we have time. Great. In terms of future meetings, we'll meet again next Thursday at the same time. We're looking for 6:30 p.m. That's March 31st. And I'm proposing that we may also plan to meet on Thursday, April 7th at 6:30. Does that work for everyone?
Mhm.
Okay. This is where we get optimistic. We're going to have a draft completed by that second meeting. So today we're going to discuss elements and how that progress is going. And then, so I had discussed with Wendy Ravelli, the chairperson of the Light Board, that we might present a summary of our reports, recommendations to the Light Board and receive their feedback at their April 13th meeting. And we've always said that we wanted to have some kind of public hearing or forum on this report. And I'm looking ahead into April and suggesting that we may want to do that in person or hybrid at the hearing room, and maybe seeking either April 14th, which is a Thursday, or April 28th, which is also a Thursday. April 21st is the middle of school vacation week, so I'm inclined to avoid that timeframe for such an event. Comments about that? So I'm going to make it an either or. Do we want to tentatively schedule the 14th or the 28th?
What times are they, Mark?
So this would be an evening meeting at the townhouse, I'm anticipating, so probably our usual time, or maybe 7 p.m. is kind of and I'm asking this without having first checked with town staff to find out the availability. The other room that might be appropriate for such a meeting would be the CMLP hearing room, which CMLP meeting room, which, as I understand, is also available for a hybrid meeting.
I'm fine with either date.
What are the two dates again? The 28th and the,
Either the 14th, which is the day after we would have talked with the Light Board, or the 28th, which is some 2 weeks later. I'm inclined towards the 14th because my preference is to put that first draft out there, get some feedback right away, and then have a little time left in April to create a final version. And if we wait until the 28th to have public feedback, we will have.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's get ready for it. That's a big line in the sand. Actually, I'm thinking April 1 is the big line in the sand for me.
Well, yeah.
And then have those 2 days, and then I would be in favor more of the earlier date.
Okay. Gail, your thoughts?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay.
14th and 28th if 14th doesn't work.
Okay. All right. So I'll proceed with trying to schedule that. And I like working on a burning bridge.
Reminds me of being in college and having deadlines.
Yeah.
Creative tension.
I know, I was thinking this is almost exactly the end of term schedule that I would have been looking at in those days. But that would give us the opportunity to be done. So given all of that, the idea is tonight we'll spend some time on what sections we have, what we might need, what can be pulled together, with the idea that I will try to compile whatever I get by Tuesday into an actual document that we can then sort of eyeball next week and spend time with, based on your all input, as well as what I've also done. I had a note about the Fincom hearing. I don't have any, I assume most of you got a chance to see what was going on in there. Does anybody?
was-
have any
I've been on vacation, so I missed the whole thing. Can you give me a quick summary?
Sure. The budget was basically as presented last
So if you have other,
time. And
because I guess this
the-
recent should be,
yeah, Francis.
Frank, could you mute, please?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we're just having some crosstalk. Mr. Breen?
yeah, sorry, I
Yeah,
thought I was muted. Sorry.
thank you. I appreciate it if you
All
would.
right.
Okay. So at the enterprise budget hearing, the budgets were presented in I think it was quite consistent with the forecast. Jason Bulger, who's here with us tonight, presented telecom and talked about some of their plans. I spoke on behalf of the committee. They did things a little out of order, so they ended up doing the Minuteman Media Network portion well before the light plan portion. So during that section, I made some comments about the payment in lieu of franchise. The most substantive, at least in my mind, was the fact that Minuteman Media Network is operating with a $400,000 roughly budget and for the year, and expecting, I think, 390 plus thousand from their Comcast revenues, and has a fund balance of about $1.4 million. So that's monies that they can spend at their discretion, is my understanding. And so I kind of rose to make the point that a $20,000 transfer from Broadband was really pretty unnecessary, represented as a significant amount of the free cash flow for the broadband business. About the operating profit was going to be, I think, 180,000 with 160,000 left after that transfer. And Broadband, which has a $1.6 million budget, so 4 times the size of Minuteman Media Network, operates with a fund balance that's $240,000 now and is projected to expand to about 440,000. So if you look at these two entities just from a purely financial perspective, Minuteman Media Network has considerable resources available for its current needs, where you could really argue that Broadband has considerably fewer resources available, and yet it's being asked to provide less than required. And I also pointed out that Broadband's not a cable franchise. Other operators of providing fiber optic telecommunications in the town of Concord are not required to make any such payment. And I also pointed out that I didn't think that either the finance committee or any other citizen entity had really ever actually put in place the policy under which this was being done. And I asked the finance committee to consider weighing in on that subject. I know some of the rest of you were here. Is there anything else that I left out that you want to say about?
Yeah, well, 2 things. First of all, I think, the YouTube is certainly available, so that's worthwhile. And I did sit in. I will, since I'm the rep from the PEG Access Committee, I will say that one of the things that is almost from the outset, just around the time we started the PEG Access Committee, which I've been on since its inception, the town decided to take over the public television services for some reasons, which are probably good at that time. This was actually back when Chris Whalen was the town manager, and the stated intention was to spin it back out. I think that notion has gone by the wayside. The thing that the PEG Access Committee has been worried about and continues to be worried about is that we are worried that there's some cliff coming relative to the franchise fee that comes from Comcast. And so I would say that one thing that has been the mindset on that side of the from the committee's viewpoint and our recommendations, although there's getting involved in operations, there's another whole thing there. The one thing that we've been concerned about is if that cliff or there is a fall off in revenue, then the net effect of that is that the entire cost of the Minuteman Media Network, which has somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 full-time employees or so right now, plus the studio, would fall to the town's budget. And so right now, yeah, it's in good shape, but I think that's why they've been kind of paranoid, is like they don't see a growth path. It's all dependent, we're completely dependent on the Comcast with a very small amount that comes from Carlisle. And that's been renegotiated and it's on a pay-as-you-go basis. So I think it's probably gone down a little bit. So that may be kind of the mindset that's coming from that side of this whole thing.
I'd be interested to hear others, and I'm going to encourage us at some point to take a position on this particular thing. I think because it is, as a recommendation or not, I think it's our responsibility to propose something. I didn't note in my comments that I think that the work that Minuteman Media Network does is important and useful and should be paid for by the town. So that's my personal opinion. So I have no problem with it. I would also note that they're sitting on 3.5 years worth of expenditures at their current rate if they didn't get another dollar. So that's a pretty long time to do it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
1,500 broadband users are being asked to contribute what amounts to some extra money. So I have absolutely no problem with the mission. I just think that that this isn't the way to fund it. And I think putting on our fiber completion hats, we have to ask ourselves, is this a productive use of the limited broadband funds? I would ask the converse question too. It's like, if we thought that for some reason broadband was running out of money or somehow operating at a loss or had a poor revenue projection, would we start going around to the rec fund or somebody else and saying, well, you guys should pay for broadband because it's good to have?
One of the things I would say also, just as a parenthetically, is it might be worth folks to listen to the conversation around the BD Center, which is struggling to stay positive and has some real challenges, including some deferred maintenance that could bite them, I think.
Mhm.
And I did think that conversation in that budget hearing was an interesting conversation and may have some relevance to how the town, or at least at the budget committee level, the town views these activities. I mean, in many ways, the BD Center and this broadband work we're working on are both things for the betterment of the town and the town citizens. I think we're both conceptually designed to operate at a kind of near zero net profit, keep plowing the money back into it, pay for itself, be a value proposition. So
Mhm.
I did just
Okay.
go ahead. This is only, I wanted to make what I would call actually a personal observation about all this, which I thought was kind of interesting, which is when I started thinking about this and Minuteman Media Networks, and actually each of these are different. So I need to rethink how I say this. BD Center has a capital expenditure, which is their building and their pools and all their equipment. Our broadband has a fairly significant capital investment, which, by the way, one of the things I've observed when I've been looking at the financials and working on my portion of this is a lot of the, when we have an expense. So remember, we've talked about this notion that the customer pays $150 and it costs somewhere between $900 and $1,200 or $1,400 to install. That installation cost is actually translated into capital value and capital equipment, then that is then put on a depreciation scale. So when you look at the finances of the broadband, there is there is this capital value. And when I first looked at it, it's a pretty good sized number now. I can't remember exactly what it is. It's well north of $1 million. I thought, is this a portion of the $4 million that was spent on the fiber infrastructure for smart metering? And the answer is no. It's actually the money that was spent in getting from the pole or whatever to the ONT inside the house, that installation, that created a capital piece of equipment that's owned by the Broadband Fiber Committee. And when you look at the finances, if you look at it kind of like from a commercial viewpoint, we convert cash into this capital value. And that's one of the things that we do as part of our activity. So I think it may be an important way to kind of think about what we're doing. And by the way, what that means is that, let's say if we had a higher expense for installing fiber to some home, pick a number, $2,000, $2,500, because it's harder to reach, that itself would also become part of that capital value to the business. And so one could argue that you make that investment, that becomes a piece of capital, and it's it may be a relatively low risk capital because it lives for 20 plus years. And we can count on revenue over 20 plus years from that house, even if it costs us $2,500 or $3,000 to get to it. So it's something that we might want to sort of factor into our recommendations here, how the town and the finance committees and so forth view that capital investment.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for those points. Going back to the BD Center for a moment, the BD Center is, of course, seriously challenged by the pandemic and the closures, although it was certainly not in particularly good shape even before that, although they were trying to address it. And so I would make, 2 points about that, which are part of what was presented in the hearing. One was that the town general fund is electing not to recover about $100,000 a year in this coming budget from the BD Center operations for what they call shared services. This is the support from the finance department and the HR department and various other IT and those kinds of things that the town does in a group as a way of helping with the fact that they're having a shortfall. So in my mind, that's a decision that can be made. It was surfaced and certainly examined and is appropriate when when an enterprise or account starts to get into trouble for that sort of discussion to be had. And so it is useful to think about that and, think about what that might mean for Minuteman Media Network if they ever had a shortfall. Maybe and what that, at least in my way of thinking, because it's a general fund that's providing relief for that enterprise, that relief represents all of us paying together, like everybody that pays into the town's general tax base is helping to relieve that one thing, which I think is considerably different than going around to some particular enterprise and saying, we'd like you to make a donation here. So, and the other thing that was also clear, and I don't remember the numbers, so somebody can remind me if they do, but I believe that they were also expecting to receive, ARPA relief for lost revenue to help them, get back on their feet. And of course, we've done some math, and I have a write-up that we'll share in a few minutes. I believe that we should be recommending that CMLP go forward looking for ARPA revenue relief, and I think that we can have some very defensible math about what that impact has been to date and how significant it is going forward. And I'm happy to share that in a few minutes when we get into our report section stuff.
Before we got into BD, I just wanted to respond to what you were saying before, if I can bring it to mind here for a second, about, right. I think you stood up admirably for the cause here, Mark. So thank you for doing that. And one way to look at a decision like that is procedurally, like what was the procedure that resulted in that outcome? And unfortunately, in life and in organizations, a lot of times once something happens, it becomes sort of the truth by nature of the fact that we've always done it that way. It only has to happen once and it's already precedent. So it's going to be a little hard to undo that. But in this case, procedure actually also aligns with reasonableness, right? Would this have been an outcome that, would this action have been taken if it actually had been given a really proper weighing of all the impacts? So anyway, yeah, I don't know how strongly a legalistic kind of approach or procedural approach is going to actually resonate. Some people may not actually like hearing that. It's like, because anyway, they're just trying to do their jobs or try to, move the ball forward. But that is what those procedures are in place for, to help improve these kinds of decisions.
A good follow-on question to that would be, what would it take procedurally to reverse this, or essentially
It would be
remove
a lot harder
for the broadband? Actually, not, because we're talking about enterprises and their enterprise funds. We're not talking about budgets which are actually appropriated directly by town meeting. Town meeting does an appropriation for these things, which basically says use the proceeds of the fund to fund the operations that you're talking about. And that's the extent to which town meeting does that. And so if, it could be undone as easily as done by just simply, reaching the decision that telecom is not going to make this payment, and the Minuteman Media Network side is going to either spend $20,000 less than they thought they were going to spend, or if they choose to spend it, they're going to draw it from either the Comcast revenues if they come in, because those are an estimate, not a number, and or from their $1.4 million fund balance, which is available to them at any point in time. So today, when we're talking about only $20,000, it's, in my view, eminently reversible. If at some point in the future this becomes a bigger number and more significant in their budget, then it will become difficult to do.
The other thing is I question, I know it's well-meaning, but the idea that we need to build up a balance against the day when our revenues disappear, you can't do that. You'll never save enough money against an eventual disappearance of the Comcast funds. You couldn't save enough.
Yeah.
Right. So
to be clear, it's not my intention in any way to.
Yeah, if you're talking about PEG, certainly I agree, and it's, think about, I think some years ago, the light plant had a rate stabilization fund, and they did a wonderful job of building that up and then consuming it as cost of energy went up, and we all enjoyed that. I think we all know that that's really the kind of thing it is. Think of it as a stabilization fund. And then what would happen ultimately is if Minuteman Media, if Comcast, one thing we thought of, to be quite honest with you, and Gail, you'll get a laugh out of this, is we were worried that Comcast was going to switch to doing everything in terms of their delivery over 5G fixed base cellular system. And we think that that is in the fine print of our franchise agreement that would allow them to sidestep the franchise payment, which means A, there's no wires in town for Comcast, and B, everything's over to wireless, and C, Minuteman Media would get no money. And so the question is, what would happen in that scenario? We think that ultimately, we basically, what rightly should happen is then the town would have to approve some steady state funding as part of the budget process for the Minuteman Media Network, instead of it being funded, instead of being funded out of this franchise fee. And so we know that there's no way to build up enough money to support it indefinitely. It's only just trying to understand that. And I think the other part of it was, why this payment was made by the town manager and whoever agreed to that. I wasn't involved in that. And we thought about that at the beginning, that should we actually, when Mark and I did the model years ago, I think we considered that and we decided not to put it in, thinking that someday in the future we might have to consider that, but not now, meaning 2013 when we did this. So
I mean, if the legislature or something under its taxing authority decided that internet service providers were supposed to pay some kind of universal service fee, similar to what telephone companies used to do, then obviously we would step up with our share of that. My point is that this is sort of an optional payment that is kind of being levied internally just because we can. And I believe that the real rationale for us dealing with it here is that I think that it adversely impacts the opportunity that broadband might have to have funding for building fiber. And I don't see where there's no other source that I think anybody is really seriously interested in for building more fiber than the revenue from the service. So I'm inclined to very carefully protect that against other allocation purposes, because I don't see where that gets replenished.
Yeah.
So I know we end up talking about that every time, but I did want to mention that I made that point. I did not stick around, unfortunately, to hear what what, if anything, the finance committee might have accepted or not accepted about that towards whether they were inclined to take any action. But I think it's worth following up to try and figure that out. Beyond that, so
I did want to make a point. I watched portions of that FinCom meeting and including the presentation on the telecom budget, I believe, by Jason Bulger. And I was encouraged that he spoke about a couple of things, which I think he may have mentioned to us before, but I was just glad to hear them again. Was he talked about adding tools to speed installations was something that the broadband operation wanted to do. And then also they wanted to focus on marketing. So those were two I thought were real positives. We've talked about those in our meetings.
And wait, I'm sorry, that was at the finance meeting that they mentioned that?
I believe so.
Yeah, and
yes.
actually, you guys wouldn't have heard it unless you attended the last light board meeting, but Jason Bulger, who may be hearing my words at the moment, gave a really impressive presentation about their plans to make improvements along a number of different axes. And so that's all really super encouraging.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And thank you, Jason, for your efforts. I will also mention that in response to the data request that we had made for classifications of some of the areas that we had identified in the maps, Jason did send some a response out based on the work of one of the technicians, which came in kind of late last night. So I was looking it over a little bit today. It raised, in my mind, a bunch of interesting questions, I think. And I think it's going to be an area where there's more work to be done. I think we all agree that being able to classify what the issue is where there is no fiber, both on these street levels and also I think subsequently on the multi-dwelling unit and MDU level. I started trying to parse out the data, found myself in a little bit of a maze today, so I'm not really prepared to say a whole lot more about that right now. But I am hoping to come up with something useful. One of the things that it triggered for me anyway, Gail, just so to mention it, is you remember a couple of weeks back, we had a lot of discussion about mains and sub-mains and apartments and what that meant. And I started kind of taking through the data a little bit more, trying to sort that out and looking at some specific properties like the I think it's the Warner Woods property, which is at, 240 something Lawsbrook Road, and the Concord something Commons property at 95 Conant, and trying to just sort out to what extent can one understand how many apartment units there are in these things. The whole Wedgewood Common, I think that's what the area is called, is another place right in that same vicinity that sort of has a bunch of buildings that lack fiber connectivity, but isn't recognized as a road without fiber connectivity. So I guess this is all by way of saying that our data, to the extent that we understand it, is still somewhat incomplete in terms of really being able to classify that. I know you were also interested in trying to determine how many affordable housing units there were. And I note that there's some classification in the MAT status spreadsheet that was provided by Jill Moon-Aaron that
Okay.
talks about some properties. You can sort of see which ones are apartment. I think it's a classification of apartment 8 or something like that. So but it's still a little opaque which thing is. Actually, you know what? I'll just briefly put this on the screen just because.
Could it be like Section 8 housing? Is that a term for
It
affordable?
is, yep.
No,
Yeah.
but this is like, for example,
Yeah.
247 Lawsbrook Road, which is in a big apartment building, is classified in the use description of apartment over 8. In other words, my interpretation of that. I'm going to just make this big enough so that hopefully it's not too much of an eye chart. Let me.
And while you're doing that, I'll just put in a plug. Carlin Reed pointed me to a resource that has a list of all of Concord's affordable housing. And I don't have my numbers in front of me, but anyway, so I have that and we can put that in there. So that is another, kind of work to be done to kind of cross-reference that with fiber.
Yeah.
But I do
Yeah.
seem to have a comprehensive list.
Sorry, I'm in too many windows hell at the moment. So what I was alluding to, I think we'll start with this, is if you're looking at a map, this shaded parcel is 247 Lawsbrook Road, which is an apartment complex. There's the picture of it. And so it's a fairly large building. And so I started to sort of try to ask the question of how would one understand how many addresses are in there, and knowing that nobody is getting any service there. And as you can see that in the parcel status spreadsheet, it's just one row. This row that is that a complete eye test for people, or can you see it?
No, I can see
I
it.
can see it.
So you can see that this use description field is apartment over 8. So presumably that means it's an apartment building that has more than 8 units, as opposed to something like this one on Commonwealth Avenue, or it's apartment 4 unit. So I don't understand that coding, but I did notice that that in those various fields, is the use description pop-up showing?
Yes. Yeah, we
Okay,
can see that.
So there's, there are a bunch of different, I just selected affordable apartment over whatever, and there's all these other things, factories, funeral homes, office condos, presumably these are meaningful to somebody on the assessing or something, but they're just trying to chase these down. My point is that these are generally in a broadband status of not available. I think there's a broadband status. Maybe it's not on here, But if you look at the map that I was just showing you, the red dot indicates that broadband status is not available. So I think we are going to struggle a little bit to really find crisp ways of defining where it is and where it isn't. But I think the data is in there. I just think it's going to take more work to pull it out. I'm not sure I had much more of a point than that.
I was just gonna say, I've scanned the data that Jason sent yesterday,
Yeah,
and it's not clear for me. It has some useful points, and I'm not sure how that, what I would be most interested in with a presentation like that would be some kind of way to sort of like summarize and say, okay, so how many of these do we know about? How much more work remains
yeah,
in answering the question about what's missing, what the missing streets amount to. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so it's a great first step. And the way that Jason explained it in his email was that this is what we could do with the resources that we had on hand
Yeah.
to
So
further
this, you
require
mentioned,
a road or a truck roll.
you mentioned an email from Jason.
yes.
I don't seem to have it.
You do not. The reason you don't is because Jason sent it back to the requesters, which were myself and Gordon.
Okay.
So
Oh,
it
okay.
hasn't
Would you
been-
mind sharing that with the rest of the committee then?
Not at all. I should have done it already. So in fact, let me do that and as we speak. Great.
So I'm just saying, from the way it's laid out, I can't really tell, like when there's when that document spreadsheet has a row where there's no comment,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Does that mean they need a truck roll, or do the comments anyway? So anyway, thanks for getting started on the project. And this kind of information is going to be really important.
And that was kind of what I was trying to do, was figure out whether there was a quick way to summarize what came back from us to us, and I couldn't quite get there in one day. So I'm going to commit to digging into that a little bit more deeply. But I wanted to acknowledge the fact that we have in fact received a response to that, and we definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, that I guess we'll, just so we're keeping track of where we are. I think that would take us through the chair's report. I don't have any anything more on fiber construction with the roads program. I'm happy with making a recommendation that coordination be worked out by staff. I think is based on the discussions that I had with the Public Works Director. Item 5 on the agenda, the American Recovery Plan Act and lost revenue estimate. I did generate a version of an ARPA reimbursement funding request. And what I'm looking for here, I think, is sort of a agreement. If you agree with this, then we might want to discuss how to present or push this forward.
Was this based on the thing I did, Mark?
So I wrote to you about that. And
I know, I'm sorry, didn't have time to get back
the
to
short
you.
answer is not quite, but I think we are in the same ballpark.
Okay, one thing that I was thinking about here, and we'll see if you capture this, which is when I first did this, it was sort of the area under the curve, but the second part would be the area. So if we have a delayed installation because we lost 100 installations for a year, pick a number. That's something that will persist as long as we haven't reached saturation of our installations, right? And so
Yeah.
that could be 3 or 4 years out. And
Yeah,
I don't think that calculation, the one I did, took that into account, and maybe you did. So
yeah. So I put the words on the screen. What I will briefly do, maybe before we cover the words, is I know I apologize for jumping around so much tonight, but so I had done a calculation. I distributed this before and then I refined it. So this was based on data we'd received from Matt Cummings before. I updated it to include the number that Jason reported at the enterprise budget hearing of 1,564 subscriptions as of January of 2021, which I chose to represent as December, so that if anything, that works a little bit in our negative. But these two sort of yellowish boxes are two different calculations. One is based on a 14% growth rate, which is the upper portion, which was the growth rate in 2019. If that continued, would have led to 283 additional subscriptions. Another was the 3 years immediately prior to 2017, 18, and 19, the average new installations was 195. So this is the idea that installations are gated by staffing. We have the same amount of staffing, therefore we would have done that. And, demand says, so those are fairly close numbers, but slightly different. It would have resulted in 230. If the average revenue per customer per month is $70, that's $840 per customer per year. And using what I described before, which is 6 months in the first year of billings and 12 months in the second year, the loss of monthly revenue would have been $229 or $204,000 respectively in the two models. And if you add the $150 installation fee to each of those, you'd come up with numbers in the range of 240 on the 195 per year model, or 271 on the 14% per year model. Is that, I know I went through that quickly, but I think you guys have all seen this before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm more comfortable with arithmetic growth rather than percentage growth,
Mhm.
because it doesn't really actually inherently snowball.
Yes.
Like a bank balance might.
Yeah, and I think in the face of the fact that the percentages have been declining, but actually the installations per year, they're noted in this column H, were 177 in 2019, 221 in 2018, 188 in 2017, and we don't have the data before that. But
yeah,
my experience tells me that I'm actually more comfortable with that too. It's more conservative. Yes, David.
So I agree with the numbers fully, but looking at it from another viewpoint, as someone who might be looking at this and saying, okay, what are your numbers for 2022?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have those?
Well, the growth, we haven't seen much actual information yet about how fast it's growing. I would say that it's only March.
Yeah.
And so if you look at past years, for example, March of 2020 was -2, March of 2019 was 12. So the big numbers tend to come in the middle of the year when the weather is warmer.
Yeah, I'm not questioning
Yeah.
At all the validity of the numbers. I'm taking, like, what if somebody looks at this and says, okay, I get your numbers, I understand your numbers. Let's say January, February, March of 2022 are non-COVID events. I'm not sure you can argue that because we did have some problems. How you're doing this year? So I not being I personally, but I as a person who's going to allocate funds can look at where you are in 2022 to see how this growth is moving in a non-COVID period against the numbers you're showing us.
Yeah.
That
I
would
would, my response to that would be, let's use the 195 per year number. And
Okay.
if 2022 appears to exceed that, we can assume that we're catching up.
Yep.
And if it underruns that, then we can ask ourselves, is that because there's still a pandemic effect or some other effect, or is the business really just plain slowing down?
Yeah.
Mark, we have more data. This is a table that I know I've sent you, and I can show it to you right now. I'm going to put it up. That's the table that I got from Matt, and it's got the data from 2013 to 2021.
Yeah.
So if you need more complete data, there it is. And
Yeah.
the 325 or 300 is the peak, and those down years were that. So you might want to consider using those numbers.
Yeah, and
You
so
have those, by the way. So.
195 is very conservative, and I'd be happy to. Anyway, so
Well, 195 was during COVID. That's why I don't quite understand the number. There's
actually I used 2017, 18, and 19, which is all
Could you
pre-COVID,
put that back?
okay, perfect. Yeah.
which is the most recent 3 years. So anyway, let's
Can you put that back up again, just for a second, please?
Which one?
The left chart you put on the screen.
the one Scott had.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
just for a sec.
So
Thank
the
you.
things that are not in green were provided by the light plant. The things in green was my scribbling, and that's why I said need to check. And this
Okay.
is where I did the sort of
Yeah, yeah.
revenue delta kind of calculations and
Okay,
stuff.
thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think this was mailed out.
yeah.
Or-
What's a little confusing to me about that is that would suggest a bigger number than 195, because there's no
Yeah.
way that 271, 214, and 300 average out to 195. But well,
But we don't know, or do we, maybe, we don't know how 2022 is running at this point.
no, it's not. That's not something I know.
I'm sorry?
I do not know.
Okay, thank you.
So
Yeah, I think that this is great. I think there's a point of diminishing returns on this. And even if we had the perfect set of numbers, it would only make so much more difference.
yeah,
It's a whole story, and maybe that's what this, thanks for bringing this.
yeah.
Please continue.
So this is sort of what I would propose how we might frame a request. Recognize that the pandemic curtailed installations using the time period from March 2020 to March 2022, because that's all in the past for 24 months. Indicate that we've modeled the loss. We know that there was a policy decision made to suspend installations except in special circumstances for safety reasons, and I think that's well documented. I'm not sure exactly when that policy was ended, so that's why I have a checklist in there. But also then going on to say that it was started in 2019. It is constrained by seasonal weather conditions.
Mark, you have 14 in your note, but you just said 19.
I'm sorry. Yes, I meant 14.
Okay,
But then, documenting how we get to the average of 195, noting that for the data that we have, we experienced just 71 and 80 net new in the following 2 years. And so this is supposed to say 2019. Using the 2019 rate of growth as a guide, it's estimated that we're 239 to 283 more subscribers would have been on the system by now than are actually connected. And then talking about the what that means in terms of lost revenue to date is 240 to 271. Those are the numbers I showed you in the first spreadsheet. And also noticing that a 240 fewer subscribers represents an ongoing revenue impact, and this is to the point that Scott was mentioning, of $1,680, $16,800 per month. So this is, you know, even if it took us the rest of this year to catch up, you could argue that there's a, you know, an easy another $100,000. And I don't think there's anybody out there who thinks we're actually going to, you know, connect 400 subscribers this year.
Right.
Yeah, that's, so, but, you know, just being conservative. So I'm noting that the impact of this reduction will continue for some time. And it's unclear when or if the system will make up for these opportunities. We should really, you know, we should be, you know, the purpose of seeking relief is that we don't know how long it may take to rebound. And we have this, Broadband has this small fund balance, 249 at the end of 2020 and 434 at the end of 2021 if the estimates come in. If Broadband received that, that would be a significant improvement in the resources available for capital. And that's the rationale. And so what I'm suggesting we might want to do is, you know, present this at least to the light board and ask, and essentially ask that the town manager, and I think that was, no, okay, yeah, the fiber broadband has modeled this and request that the town manager consider including this request for the application of ARPA recovery funds based on. I haven't submitted this to my editor yet, Gail.
Mhm.
All right.
Just the very first paragraph, I think you're missing. The COVID-19 pandemic has curtailed broadband operation during the period, blah, blah, blah. The specific impact on broadband can be estimated. That's not right. It should be the specific impact on broadband revenue.
Revenue, sure.
Okay.
Installs and thus revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And the other thing is that, you know, I'm trying to just sort of think in reverse. Okay, think in terms of who's going to receive this and how they might be moved. Well, what kind of decision are they making, and what factors are they balancing? And one way that I mean, I don't know who actually is going to make this decision. It could be the town manager and nobody else. But on what basis? It could be their perception of who needs the money the most. I mean, that's what this is great for, right? We're making a statement, or the case for it. But one of the things that may factor in that decision is the enabling language of the ARPA legislation itself. And so we could certainly throw in some things here about, you know, the funds were allocated, you know, appropriated in order to help recover from COVID. They were meant to address telecom specifically, which is a claim on that money that is unique to us, right?
Yeah.
And to fill in the gaps in coverage. And that's actually been an area where I've got some pushback, like, oh gosh, you know, Concord doesn't have any gaps. Might want to, and Mark, everybody here has discussed ways that we can explain that there are gaps. So, you know, you just take a bullet point from what, you know, with a takeaway from those discussions and put that in there. So basically try and make it a little, add a few more prongs to the argument in anticipation that you don't know exactly what question you're answering here.
That's exactly why all of us are smarter than any of us. Thank you, Gordon. Those are excellent points. I couldn't agree more. Any other comments? Okay, so my sense is that,
And one other thing was, I thought it was great that fit on one page.
okay,
So try to keep it that size.
So my sense is that we are supportive of at least, requesting that this be included with the others. I know that, it's well understood at the town level that, basically everything that the town received could be expended just on the revenue loss side. There are plenty of other people lining up to ask for it, but so I feel like we're in a good place there. But I do think that, the point about filling in gaps and that it is broadband specifically, and I, stopping short of exactly saying, this needs to be used to build, I would be inclined, one of the ideas that I had that I didn't put in there was this notion that maybe this should be done specifically to try to, in conjunction with efforts that Jason might be doing, but accelerate the demand again. Because if those orders aren't coming in because people have sort of forgotten that it's out there, or, there's not enough word of mouth, or there's been some negative publicity because some of the things that happened last year, just combating that might, help restore the installation pace to the one that, kind of to David's point, how do we know that the installs are going to plan now?
Also affordable, getting better coverage for affordable housing. And you know what, that's actually kind of a weird way to put it this way, but that's actually a revenue opportunity.
Yes. Okay, good. So we'll develop that further. As I alluded in the well, I don't think there's any specific deadline for that. So I think we can deliver it alongside of everything else that we deliver. But I kind of thought that this particular one made sense to be almost in a letter form, just, light board endorse sending this letter to the town manager and the director saying, we think you should do this. Just as a way of pushing it.
Wait, so we're going to address, shouldn't we address this to everybody, not just the light board?
Yeah, that's just an example, but
Sure.
some mechanism like that to say here, we think this should go forward right away, and it's a fairly completely reasoned out. So if you guys I'll commit to making a better, more final draft of that next week, and we can decide what to do with it.
So I had just a question. So this, I don't think that this, I'll just call it a letter, is intended to be the entirety of our requests that ARPA cover broadband. Is that correct? That's just one way to quantify a reasonable request, and maybe we want to put in a little caveat there that, there may be other arguments to be made for capturing a larger share of ARPA funding for the broadband infrastructure. But here's something that's really important right now, or I don't know, you know what I'm saying?
An example of that, Gail, would be that in addition to that lost revenue replacement that we analyze and present here, we would need a certain amount of money to cover a certain number of affordable housing developments.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. So, I think on the one hand, there's the case of here's the pain that was suffered. This is what you can do to try to relieve the actual harm. And then here are the things that might be a little bit more on the proactive side that might move us further down some of the other goals. Okay. So I wanted to shift, that's good feedback. Thank you all. I wanted to shift gears towards the report outline. I've been attempting to kind of compile where we stand on the sections that we've looked at, what we've got. And I have also created something else along those lines, along the lines of a capital program identifier. But I also want to give each of you a chance, if there's something that you've been working on that you want to get some feedback on, or talk about the development of, this would be a great chance to have some of that discussion.
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
I talked to Mark briefly. I'm working on the HOA issue. And one of the comments I made to Mark before we started was, I kind of have it in my head, I haven't put it down to paper yet, is that I kind of come to this circular problem with, and I'm using this word, I'm kind of stuck with the Concord Green issue, which may or may not be unique. And, you know, we have an HOA board, we have residents' opinions, and what I kind of call barriers to CMLP getting in here with broadband. And I don't know if those are applicable to, let's say, the Mill Dam development where the old Rose Hawthorne School was. And so if you have any input that you want me to put into this write-up, I'll happily take. If you want to give me some input now, I'll write it down. But I'm struggling to make sure that it's not just a Concord Green write-up about the problems of the costs that HOAs face to getting broadband in, and the resistance that the residents offer, the HOA boards come up with, and then the barriers that CMLP has in installing broadband in a 210 unit like our association has. Because it honestly, for us, excuse me, even if we weren't doing the paving project, it's a dead end right now for broadband.
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to write it as a dead end.
So two comments. One is, you know, I think the way I would suggest you think about this is the way that we've constructed the description, which was, think of it as there's a third party that lies between the end user and Concord Broadband. And in this case, it's the homeowners association. And then maybe another example that we can think of and how to write about that as a separate thing. And I would hope that the demographic work that Mark's done can lead you in that, to identify that other kind of entity. Is it a landlord and a rental tenant? Is it a homeowners association and an end owner, end user, but in a shared complex like you have? Those are two that I can think of right off the top of my head. You know, maybe those are two areas that you could, you know, those are two bins you could talk about separately, because each one of them might have a different solution.
We also have a third, which is the residents.
No, I'm saying there's three entities. The resident.
I'm sorry, you said two, but go ahead.
Two different categories in which there are three parties involved.
Okay, all right.
Okay, one category is homeowners like Concord Green that own their property plus some percentage, or in common, the land that lies between themselves and the edge of the common property and the town, right? So, and the entity that controls that common land is the homeowner association. That's one scenario.
Yeah.
Another scenario is like where my daughter lives over on West Concord, where she lives in an apartment. So there's a landlord that lies between her as an individual, the resident, if you will. She doesn't own the property, and the town. And in that particular case, one of the things I discovered since our last meeting, much to my chagrin, was that there was in fact the facility to put Concord Broadband into her apartment. She's been there for almost 4 years, and we didn't even know that. And I would have been keenly aware of that. So that gives you an idea how bad the marketing is.
Yeah.
And I was just really blown away, frankly.
Sorry about that, Scott.
Well, I mean, someone should have just freaking put a letter in the mailbox. They don't, you know, they could have walked over there and put them in the mailbox. But anyway, so but those are two categories that I can think of just off the top of my head that are in that where there's a third party in between. And maybe the one other one is the one other one that I think and maybe Mark can give us a guidance on the different categories identified, but the other one is the one where that isn't a third party in between, but it's more of the street that has underground utilities that are direct buried or buried without a conduit that would allow for fiber. And so now how do you get across that? But that property is either owned by the town as right of way or the property owners that's adjacent to that right of way in their property. So those are three scenarios that I think may gather some number of the examples that we're struggling with here, right? Three categories, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that. That was a great idea you just had, Scott, about couldn't we have just have sent a letter?
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
you know, how do we
I
get that
gotta
in
tell
the
you,
report?
yeah, there's something else that I'll just warn you now that I've discovered, and I'm actually doing a fair amount. You noticed some time ago that I sent around this thing about the vibratory plow that this place in Washington State was using.
Yeah.
I spent some time on their website. Let me tell you a couple of things that I've discovered that we might make as suggestions, and they can just go there and look. They have what they call fiberhoods, which is the same concept that Google did back in the beginning, which is you have to sign up in your fiberhood, which is a small geographic area. And until they get a certain percentage saturation in that fiberhood, they won't come in and do the install. So that's an interesting thing. Another thing that I thought was quite interesting about their model is they don't have the $150 install cost. They have a $25 construction adder that lives for 12 years. So what they do is they amortize it, they take their financing, but they're covering $3,600. My guess is because in the case of this town, they're not sitting on top of the $4 million infrastructure that we got for more or less free to get started, which is the smart meter infrastructure. They're having to put fiber in everywhere. So they created the fiber hoods and they create this construction adder, which is low enough that people are willing to pay it as pay as you go model. So I've actually
$25 per month?
per month for 12 years.
Oh, so times 144.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
It's good money.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting,
But-
and I just think there's some that we should, these are some other suggestions and ideas that we should be looking around at how other communities are going after these problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fiberhood idea is a good one. I also, I think I introduced this a little bit, and I'm happy to. It was on that same spreadsheet that we were looking at earlier when we calculated the cost. And it's this concept of, are we really accurately recognizing what the value of each subscription actually, sort of the lifetime revenue of a subscription? And so in this box here that I've kind of got highlighted, the notion is that if you can expect a subscriber to last for 20 years, or an implied churn rate of 5% a year, that suggests that subscriber who's paying you $840 per year has a lifetime revenue of $16,800. So, is it really, would it be potentially wise to spend a little bit more than 1/10 of that? Let's say that our current models suggest that we're willing to spend about $1,600 to get that customer. Maybe we're willing to spend a slightly larger proportion of that. And if you assume that the churn rate is even lower, like 3% or 2% or 1%, that value of having that person as a subscriber, it sounds like from the example you just gave, Scott, that business is expecting that people stick around for 12 years. Okay, that's a higher churn rate than we have there, but that's still saying, can I extract enough revenue? And if they're adding something, so maybe to use another, David, did you say there's 210 units at Concord Green?
Use 210.
Yeah. So, if just 10% of those units took the service, there's $352,000 of revenue over 20 years. How much should should the enterprise be willing to pay to enable those 21 customers?
Yeah, if I could add to what you said, Mark, you and I had a longer discussion about this. And I think we used a higher than 10% to rationalize the expense of the guesstimate of $400,000, and it made sense once you got to, I forget the exact number,
Yeah,
but the payback was there once you got a higher rate of acceptance.
yeah, 20% would be $700,000.
So the
By the way, the number I would use is roughly 6,800 households we have in Concord, right?
Yeah.
And right now we have just shy of 2,000 installs. So that's 29%.
Yeah.
Now Concord Green might be lower, but 20% would be a reasonable assumption.
Yeah.
So, and that I think I think the methodology, the notion that, especially if you kind of combine those approaches, like the one that Scott was suggesting, the fiberhood one, which is as long as we have firm orders from some number of customers, then the assumption could be that, well, more will likely be added once those other people discover the quality of it. So it's it is a more detailed look at what the investment model might be for customer acquisition expenses, really, is what we're talking about.
Could I offer a slightly different view of that churn table?
Oh, sure. Do you want me to leave it up?
No. I connect it to what I heard when Scott described a letter, a missing letter. Why didn't his daughter know about the service when she moved in? Well, moving in is the flip side of moving out. It's an event, right? It's a transition.
Yeah.
That's an area where there's an opportunity if we could learn to pay attention to it. So that when one person who has the service moves out, that first of all, the town should know about it, right? The electric plant will know about it because there's a reset in the subscription. That could potentially trigger kind of a mini marketing flurry to try and retain that customer. And then what you're doing, maybe it would be good to have that spreadsheet back up because you move down a row. You move from the 12-year lifespan to the 16-year lifespan, right? By basically artificially achieving continuity, right? If the person who's been there moves out after 20 years, but then you replace them with someone who stays another 13 years, you've just created 28. Another
right.
Or
33.
Thank you. Yeah, 28 minus 16. Anyway, so there's an opportunity there.
Especially since that initial installation, which is the actual construction extension of the, does last from one homeowner to another. And, presumably you get that, installation fee or reconnection fee to defray any costs of a transition. So it is about investing in that extension of the network in the first place. So, I think some of those ideas might all, be useful to weigh in when we think about the multi-dwelling and HOA situation is to, I do think there's very reasonable and pretty conservative. This could be, money well spent from a marketing perspective, because once it's there, it is reusable on the scale of 30 to 50 years, really, if not by the actual customer, but by subsequent customers, as Gordon just said. Yeah. Okay. Good. Anything else on the HOA thoughts?
If I can add, if you have any thoughts, just email them to me. I would really appreciate it.
Okay.
I just share with you a comment that the light plant manager made to me, which is that basically there's some reluctance to have Concord employees crawling around attics and basements and so forth of these apartment buildings. So there's kind of an institutional reluctance to actually really, anyway,
Mhm.
Right,
yeah.
well, to do us, they'd have to do a little attic crawling.
Yeah, right. And maybe, I mean, when you Mark knows more about this than I. When you put a pond in a residence, does the light plant come inside the residence?
Yes.
Okay, so the light plant would have to go inside the attic
Yeah.
of Concord Green.
And
So
we do
I'm
have,
not sure, being not in his shoes and not working in that, Mark, again, you might know more, maybe anyone else on the committee might know more than I do, but exactly where that reluctance comes from. And I'm not sure if it's a real thing, and it's, we could, and if I could characterize it in an accurate way, I'm not really sure what
Mhm.
things I could suggest to solve that problem, except to say that, I think that he'd be more willing to have a contractor do it or have Concord Green do it.
Yeah. At the time that we were planning this initially, the thinking was that the technicians that actually went into a CMLP customer's home to install broadband should actually be CMLP employees, because then there was a high level of understanding of who was there when they were there, and if anything did occur. And there was, I will say that in the period of time that I was managing this, there were a few accidents that occurred of one kind or another, accidental damage or something like that. And it was very convenient in some ways to have that conversation, be able to be with an employee, with the supervisor, with the homeowner, get the right story, do the right thing, and and move on. We had a concern that if once you start hiring contractors to do that, then that's a level of disassociation that you have with whoever might have been there, and it was a little bit harder to really be accountable to customers. So
Okay.
I was certainly supportive of that, but recognizing, of course, that as soon as you do that, you're limiting the rate at which you can do those activities to the number of employees you have. We used contractors out in the street in the right of way to hang fiber and things like that, because we felt more comfortable that then you're not having that potential interaction with the home. And of course, the usual things, there has to be somebody over 18 there, and that kind of thing. So you're not.
Yeah.
One of our installers looked suspiciously like Santa Claus, so you can imagine how that went. Anyway, anybody else want to raise any topics for discussion about what's going on with their sections? Okay. I wanted to sort of summarize where I think we are, and I'm going to do that, I think, by sharing a couple of,
Kind of running out of steam, frankly.
yeah, and so let me just kind of, so I think we have the following sections that are sort of being built out. So let me just summarize them quickly. And what I would like to sort of insist on is that by, let's call it Tuesday of next week, I need to have some version of this, back for assembly from each of you. And
I'm spending my weekend.
yeah, and I struggle. Let me ask you, Scott. You're working on financial model, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
You're right.
All right. So this is And Gail, you were working on the current state of fiber, and we looked at that a couple of weeks ago.
Right. And I have some, like an introductory section as well.
Okay, great. So this is kind of the sections that as I see them. So so okay, we'll go with this. And I had worked on, and some of the new elements down at the bottom are, we looked at the current state of fiber back on 210. So I think we can incorporate that. Gordon, you had worked on a growth section. We looked at that on February 24th.
I need to add more to that.
Okay.
Because I think there's an awful lot of ideas that we've covered even today
Right.
that ought to get some mention.
Right. Okay. So that's great if those can be built. The last one I'll just mention briefly, and then I think we will, because I can hear David's stomach rumbling from here. Is
Pretzel?
yeah. So
Wow,
had,
was that a big pretzel?
I
guess
got a bigger one.
I was working on 2 additional segments that I just thought I'd briefly introduce, and I'm happy to sort of share these around, and you guys can send me back comments. One is kind of a more robust description of what a broadband capital program might look like. So an agreed upon goal for construction. In other words, where are we building to? We still need to have that discussion. We recognize that this is only a part of the overall capital program, but review the unserved areas, enumerate, categorize them. We've talked about that at length. Develop a high-level method to create a rough order of magnitude cost and schedule estimates for each capital project. In other words, each one of those minutes, and then look at, engage the strategic plan to decide, what's the entire cost of the program. So identify projects, size the projects, roll up the cost of those projects, look at the funding sources and the target allocations of revenue that would support those. And if something doesn't fit in that, maybe it has to be a debt authorization or some bigger project. But identify the time frame to get this done. Have an annual process that has a 5 to 10 year outlook so that it can be done, and then decide what the funding allocation. So that's kind of where I'm headed in that direction. Again, in the interest of time, I'm happy to distribute this, and you guys can give me feedback on that.
Yeah.
And then when I just alluded to something that I call the strategic planning process. And here's what I had in mind in that, goals for service growth and return, goals that are connected to townwide policies like sustainability, affordability, and economic development, a schedule for, reviewing those goals, having a statistics, what are the high level metrics, and what's that dashboard look like? Answer these questions. What's the target market for the services? What services are offered? What are the financial goals? What are the priorities for growth, customer services, and financial return? In other words, how do those things get prioritized against each other? And what metrics? And just as a sort of straw man, diversity, equity, inclusion, what would we say to the idea of saying all affordable housing units are enabled for broadband services when constructed? In other words, it's the responsibility of broadband business to put fiber into an affordable unit just because it's an affordable unit. And then create something like the Affordable Connectivity Program or Broadband Essentials for those residents that would enable them to subscribe at a subsidized rate with minimal or no installation. In other words, that could be just a policy that that's what happens, and could be adopted so that there's little doubt that people that are in that situation get an opportunity to get a good price, good service at a good price, just because that's what the service system that they're in. So that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. And I'd be super pleased if we settled on, adopting something like that.
Can you send that to us, Mark?
Sure. And I'd encourage you guys to, from your perspectives, think about what those goals might be, and let's have that discussion over the next meeting and 2 meetings about, these are things that I think we should be adopting as recommendations for how to proceed. Okay. Anybody want to say anything else before I open it up for public comments? Hearing none. Do we have any public comments? And
So I did get an email from Mr. Breen, who apologized for, not having his audio off. So we may recall I recall from a light board meeting a while ago that he lives over on Phillip Farm Road, where I believe the utilities are required to be undergrounded, and he has what does he say? I think he kind of has like little to no hope that he's going to get broadband, but he would like to have broadband available so that he has a choice. Right now he's using Comcast, and it's it's expensive and it's offering a lot of services, but he'd like to have choices. Something interesting that he pointed out, he said it is unfair that Comcast customers are paying for a Minuteman Media Network and broadband customers do not pay for MMN but have access to it. So I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective, but maybe you might not understand the whole. He's not on the call right now, and I don't know if he's understood the whole issue with the MMN and the broadband and Comcast, but that's just an interesting perspective.
So it is fair, and the reason why Comcast pays that money is because they have a monopoly, and Concord Broadband doesn't have a monopoly, so they don't have an obligation to pay.
So we talked about this some time ago. Is there a threshold if we get above that monopoly ceases to exist? I think Carlin, and I don't think she's still on. She was on just a few minutes ago.
She's still here.
Oh, maybe I'm sorry. I apologize. I know that we discussed this before. Again.
Well, my understanding of it is the nature of the contract that the town and Comcast entered into was an exchange where the town gives them a monopoly and they agree to pay. So there's not really a threshold. You're either a party to that agreement or you're not.
So Carlin will probably point out that we're just about to renegotiate that contract. So Carlin.
And that it's not exactly a monopoly, Gordon, it's a non-exclusive license. So, and in that point, if Verizon or another provider wanted to come in and offer cable TV service, they would be allowed to execute their own franchise agreement. No, you're right, Scott. I appreciate the comments you've had during this meeting. What I wanted to find out is about how far along in the percentage-wise are you folks in completing your report, would you say?
Would it be fair to say that 90% by Tuesday of next week?
You can say whatever you want. I'm not going to be able to fact check it, Scott.
Yeah.
I can't speak to the moment. I have gathered up a lot of raw data, but I haven't formatted it yet.
I think Gail's analogy of this is 3 weeks from the end of the semester is a pretty good one.
I remember that time period. Good luck.
there's a term paper due.
Okay,
And
thanks.
it'll get done. But I appreciate that. And I think that what we know from the industry experience, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that when one cable provider achieves a non-exclusive license to operate in a community, it's relatively rare that another cable provider also pursues that same license. And that's why the sort of franchise situation is what it is in so many communities throughout this country. It's that it ends up being a geographic monopoly, if not an actual monopoly. So, but
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. Are you going to be addressing in your report the competitive nature of broadband, that there are other alternatives besides the town's broadband? Okay, and are you going to be listing those other wireline and wireless broadband providers that are available in Concord? Good, okay, thanks, that's it.
There is actually a relatively large amount of competition, really. And but to Mr. Breen's point, though, Gail, I think that there's nothing to stop a customer from actually being a Comcast customer and a Concord Light broadband customer, and there are such people. And so it's kind of, there are some people who sort of choose to pay for both. And I know that a lot of us do tend to think of one as a replacement for the other, but they are not, in fact, the same service, which is, kind of, and to the point that I was making earlier about the payment in lieu of franchise, if everybody that provided internet was required to pay into some fund that supported public access for whatever reason, then I would consider that fair. What I'm a little concerned about is that Concord Light Broadband, in that competitive environment where Verizon or Comcast or somebody else can offer an internet service without being burdened by also having to pay a franchise fee for the internet portion of their service, we're kind of doing something to ourselves that is makes us less competitive.
Mark, do you happen to remember what the situation was in Braintree? Because they had FiOS, Comcast, and the municipal, what was broadband, but was actually started as a cable television business, all playing together there. So I was just wondering if you recall what the situation was there. There was probably no franchise fee that existed.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We never really talked to them about what was going on with because remember, these PEG operations really did come out of the cable industry, and the fact that they sort of got associated with municipalities and school districts and stuff is kind of back in the day of the build out of cable in the first place. And so that's sort of an accidental thing that's happened over time. Okay. Would
it be appropriate to move for
yeah,
the meeting?
Carlin, did you have anything else you wanted to say tonight, or you asked your questions already, right?
No, I'm holding it for later. It's okay. We'll do it later.
Okay, we'll do it later.
We'll do it later.
You mean after this meeting is over?
No. I'm looking forward to reading your full report. I truly am. I think you folks have done a lot of work. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be very worthwhile. That's all.
It'll be interesting.
Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Go out and join the BD Center.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of doing it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it was interesting that there are some analogies with the BD Center, because the BD Center is operating as a town entity. It's distinctly competing against other non-municipal enterprises. And it has, so how that, and it's also serving a self-selected subset of the community, which is, so there are some interesting parallels there that I won't claim to have really thought through But anybody who wants to.
It's
elucidate.
technically really challenging to keep that operation in good shape too.
Yeah,
They've
I
had-
mean, every enterprise is a little different from the others, but they got handed a $10 million building with some very substantial operating expenses.
Yeah, and they've had to replace, they've had humidity problems and they've addressed it twice. It would have been nice if the first time they fixed it, it worked, stuff
Mhm.
like that. And I actually am afraid that I don't know if the humidity issues are controlled now, but I'm
Mhm.
afraid that might actually ruin the building if they're not. Anyway, my information is old and I please don't spread rumors about any impending disaster, anything like, anything out of toward. Sure that it's being handled properly. I'm just saying it's a challenge and it's
Yeah.
expensive too.
Right, and I mean, to the extent that I think there's some precedent that's worth understanding and thinking about in terms of what how it's being handled financially, because I do think there's something to be said for, some consistency along those lines.
Yeah.
At any rate.
Okay.
So next week early, I will commit to assembly. Gail, I'll be in touch with you about, sort of how we might collaborate around editing.
Okay,
As things get ready to go. So I'm imagining a push over the next 10 days or so. So I'd appreciate understanding your availability. And I think we're ready for a motion.
You already have it for me, but
Oh, okay. I didn't hear a second yet, though.
Second,
Okay, Gordon. Any further discussion? I don't think so. Gordon,
aye.
David,
I,
Scott,
I.
Dale,
hi.
and myself, I. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Meeting
Good night.